Diddy! With only 5 individuals, man!
Diddy could be a free man next month because they have filed a massive document.
He really wanted that out on time served, and if, worst case, he wanted to spend, say, another month in jail. So that's not going to happen.
Did y'all hear this story about Diddy could be home as early as this summer?
Today is Sunday, January 25th, and this is big news, not just for Diddy, but for his family and his fans. Because in the starting week of next month, February 1st, Diddy will be free. Good behavior inside jail, $500,000 paid, and a silent decision that was never announced publicly. For years, Sean Diddy Combs lived in a world where consequences felt optional. Not because he was invisible, but because he was too visible, too powerful, too connected. This was a man whose name didn't just appear on albums. It appeared behind boardroom doors. A man who didn't wait for permission. He moved systems. And for a long time, it worked. When people said his name, they didn't think of courtrooms or prison walls. They thought of success, influence, control. That's why what happened next didn't just shock the industry, it confused it. Because powerful men don't fall quietly, and they don't fall all at once. What most people don't realize is that this story didn't begin with an arrest. It began years earlier. In moments no camera stayed long enough to record. Private meetings, uncomfortable whispers, patterns people chose to ignore because the music was louder than the warning signs. At the height of his empire, Diddy wasn't just untouchable, he was necessary. Labels depended on him, artists relied on him, executives protected him, and when someone becomes necessary, truth becomes negotiable. That's how power works, not by force but by silence. So when the walls finally closed in, it didn't feel real, not to fans, not to the industry, and maybe not even to him, because prison isn't just a place, it's a psychological shock, especially for someone who's never been told no. Behind those walls, there are no assistants, no handlers, no damage control teams, just time and reflection. And that's where the story truly begins, not with guilt, not with innocence, but with reality finally catching up. And here's the part most headlines skipped. This wasn't an overnight collapse. It was a slow erosion of protection. One door closed, then another. Then suddenly the same people who once answered his calls stopped answering. If you're still watching right now, understand this. Everything you think you know about how powerful people fall is incomplete because the system doesn't move on emotion. It moves on leverage. And before we go any further, if you want the full picture, not the loud version, not the trending version, make sure you stay with this until the end. Because the turning point in this story doesn't happen where most people think it does. What happened next inside those walls? The behavior, the silence, the decisions made without cameras, that's where everything began to change. And once that shift happened, there was no going back. The arrest didn't feel real at first. It felt like a rumor moving faster than confirmation. A name too big to be handcuffed, suddenly attached to flashing lights and sealed documents. For a few hours, people waited for denial, a statement, a misunderstanding, something to explain it away. But nothing came. And that silence spoke louder than any press release ever could. Because when a powerful man is truly protected, the response is instant. Lawyers appear. Narratives are shaped. Blame is redirected. This time, there was only delay. When the news finally settled in, it didn't land like a scandal. It landed like disbelief. Not because people didn't understand the charges, but because they couldn't imagine the system actually moving forward. Diddy had survived controversies before, public ones, private ones, situations that would have ended other careers. This felt different. This felt official. Inside the industry, phones started ringing, not to defend him, but to distance from him. Because loyalty disappears the moment it becomes expensive. And outside the industry, the reaction split in two. Some saw accountability, others saw a setup. But everyone agreed on one thing. This wasn't normal. The timing didn't make sense. The confidence from authorities didn't look rushed. There was no chaos in their tone. It looked planned. That's when people started asking the wrong questions. They asked who reported him, who testified, who benefited. But the real question was much simpler. Why now? Because arrests like this don't happen when evidence appears. They happen when protection disappears. And something had shifted. What most people don't know is that by the time the arrest became public, the decision had already been made long before, behind closed doors, without cameras, without noise. The handcuffs weren't the beginning. They were the confirmation. Inside that moment, something else happened that no one talks about. The image cracked, not in the media, but in the mind. A man who built his life on control was suddenly stripped of it. No schedule, no influence, no ability to manage perception, just process. And process is ruthless. If you think this part of the story is shocking, understand this. The arrest was the least dramatic part of what followed, because the real damage didn't happen in public. It happened quietly as doors closed and options vanished. And that's why what came next inside the system mattered more than the charges themselves. Because once the system decides you're no longer worth protecting, everything changes. The first days inside didn't look the way people imagined. There were no outbursts, no special treatment, no dramatic scenes leaking to the media. What surprised everyone was how quiet it was. Because when someone used to power loses it overnight, the reaction is usually chaos, anger, demands, resistance. None of that happened. Inside those walls, Diddy didn't try to stand out. He tried to disappear. No confrontations, no complaints, no attempts to remind anyone who he used to be. And that mattered more than people realize. In places like this, attention is dangerous. Silence is survival. The routine became simple. Wake up, follow instructions, keep your head down. For someone who spent decades controlling rooms, this was a complete reversal, and the system noticed. Officers observe everything, not just behavior, but attitude. Who causes problems? Who follows rules? Who understands the environment? And from the beginning, the notes were consistent. Compliant, respectful, no incidents. That doesn't sound dramatic, but in confinement, it's rare, because jail strips away identity. And when identity collapses, people react. Some explode, some break, some self-destruct, but some adapt. And adaptation is powerful. Word spreads fast in places like this, not through headlines, through observation, through daily patterns. He didn't isolate himself completely, but he didn't try to dominate space either. He listened more than he spoke. And when you stop talking, people start watching. That's when perception began to shift. Not publicly, but internally. Because the system isn't emotional, it's procedural. It tracks behavior like data, and data builds narratives. No rule violations, no write-ups, no resistance, just consistency. If you're watching this and thinking this doesn't matter, it does. Because the system doesn't reward apologies. It rewards predictability. And predictability reduces risk. This is where most people misunderstand how decisions are made. They think freedom is about innocence. It's not. It's about manageability. And from the inside, something became clear. This wasn't someone trying to fight the system. This was someone learning how to exist inside it. And that shift, quiet, unnoticed, undocumented by the media, would later become a key factor in everything that followed. Because in a place built to control chaos, the calm ones always stand out. Most people hear the phrase good behavior and think it's meaningless, like it's just a line used to soften a story. But inside the system, good behavior isn't a phrase. It's a record. Every movement is logged. Every interaction is observed. Every reaction becomes part of a file no one on the outside ever sees. Good behavior doesn't mean being perfect. It means being predictable. No arguments, no defiance, no emotional spikes that create problems for staff. And day after day, that pattern stayed the same. What people don't understand is that jail isn't run on justice. It's run on risk management. Officials aren't asking who you were. They're asking who you are now. Can you follow rules? Can you coexist? Can you be controlled? Those questions matter more than public opinion ever will. Inside that environment, programs exist for a reason. Not for rehabilitation narratives, but for evaluation. They test patience, discipline, consistency. And participation isn't about enthusiasm, it's about reliability. Skipping isn't forgiven. Disruption is remembered. Silence, on the other hand, is rewarded. Over time, a profile forms. Not written in headlines, written in check marks. No incidents, no warnings, no escalation. That profile begins to separate certain inmates from the rest. Not as favorites, but as lower risk. And low risk changes everything. Because when decisions are reviewed, names aren't discussed emotionally. They're discussed statistically. Patterns, trends, behavioral history. This is where most narratives fall apart. People think money opens doors here. It doesn't, not directly. What opens doors is the absence of problems. And when someone consistently causes none, the system adjusts how it views them. If you're still watching, understand this. This phase of the story never makes headlines, but it shapes outcomes. Because by the time higher-level reviews happen, the question is no longer, what did they do? It becomes, how have they been? And in a system designed to manage chaos, that distinction is everything. By this point, the foundation had already been laid. Quietly, methodically, no announcements, no statements, just a file getting thicker with compliance. And once that happens, decisions stop being emotional and start becoming procedural. And procedural decisions don't reverse easily. Money is a strange thing inside the system. On the surface, it's not supposed to matter. Justice is blind. Rules are rules. But behind paperwork and procedures, money doesn't speak loudly. It whispers. And those whispers don't come in cash bags or secret handshakes. They come through compliance, through obligations being met without resistance, through problems being resolved before they ever become problems. That's where the $500,000 enters the story. Not as a bribe, not as a shortcut, but as a signal. A signal that everything required was being handled. On time, without dispute, fines, fees, legal responsibilities. When payments are delayed, files get complicated. When payments are questioned, reviews slow down. But when everything moves smoothly, the system notices. Because the system values efficiency more than sympathy. This is the part most people misunderstand. They imagine money buying freedom directly. It doesn't. What it buys is stability. No outstanding issues, no back and forth, no administrative friction. And friction is the enemy of progress. Inside the system, every delay creates hesitation. Every hesitation creates scrutiny. But when obligations are met quietly, the process accelerates. That $500,000 wasn't about influence. It was about closure. Closing loops, resolving open ends, making the file easier to move forward. And when a file becomes easy, it moves. If you're still here, pay attention to this detail, because this is where narratives get dangerous. People on the outside hear numbers and assume corruption. People on the inside see organization. An organization lowers risk. No missed deadlines, no contested fees, no unresolved obligations hanging over the case. Just clean paperwork. And clean paperwork changes tone. Because when review boards look at a file, they don't debate morality. They assess readiness. Is everything settled? Is everything accounted for? Is there anything left to delay the process? And in this case, the answer kept coming back the same. No, nothing outstanding. By this point, behavior had already built trust, and now compliance was reinforcing it. Two separate tracks moving in the same direction, quietly. And when behavior and compliance align, the system starts preparing for what comes next. Not publicly, not dramatically, just internally, one checkmark at a time. What made this phase unsettling wasn't what people heard. It was what they didn't. No breaking news, no official updates, no late-night alerts lighting up phones, just silence. And silence in cases like this is never empty. Because when something dramatic happens, the system is loud. Press conferences, statements, leaks. But when something procedural is happening, something internal, everything goes quiet. That's when people on the outside start assuming nothing is moving. When in reality, that's when everything is. Files don't travel with headlines. They travel through offices, through desks, through inboxes that never face the public. And during this period, that's exactly what was happening. Reviews were being logged, reports were being updated, behavioral notes were being summarized, but none of it was designed for the media. This is where most audiences lose a story. They think silence means delay. They think no news means no progress. But the system doesn't move on urgency, it moves on completion. And by this point, things were lining up quietly. No controversies leaking out, no disciplinary incidents surfacing, no unexpected complications. Just routine. And routine is dangerous because routine looks like nothing. Behind that quiet, decisions were being shaped long before they were ever finalized. Because by the time an announcement happens, the outcome has already been locked in. That's how institutional silence works. It protects process. If you're still watching, this is important. The loudest phase of a case is rarely the most important one. The important phase is the one where nothing seems to be happening, because that's when the system decides whether a situation escalates or resolves. And during this silence, one thing became clear internally. There was no pressure to rush and no reason to stop. Everything was stable. Everything was contained. And when a case becomes contained, it stops being a priority. It becomes paperwork. And paperwork doesn't trend. It doesn't leak. It doesn't need public attention. It just moves slowly, quietly, forward. By the time anyone on the outside started asking questions, the system had already shifted its focus from reaction to resolution. And that shift happens without noise. Always.